choosing to vote based on an issue that will never actually impact your life directly. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about our neighbors and people around us and all of that, but it's a really hard thing for me to wrap my mind around. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. Some patients like me can lose 20 to 30 pounds in a month or two. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. I have a hard time putting myself in the mindset of someone whose primary issue they vote on is abortion, even as someone who's pro-choice, or the issue that they're voting on is the environment. Like, you do you. People are free to vote based on whatever issues they want. I'm not going to dictate that for them. I just have a hard time understanding it. And therefore, I have a hard time talking about something from that position. So there was this poll done. So just a little specifics on the poll before I dive into it. It was done by Survey USA from July 10th through July 13th, 708 likely voters in Washington state. And it looked at what the top issues are for Washington voters. The Seattle Times put this out. I thought their graph was a little bit of a disaster and hard to understand, so I took their graph and I made my own graphs that would be easier to understand. So let's look at among all likely voters. So again, 708 likely voters. So regardless of political affiliation, these are the biggest issues. So if you categorize them that way, right? Cost of living is number one at 25%. Protecting democracy, number two at 18%. Abortion, number three at 10%. Guns, number four. Climate change, 5. Crime, 6. Homelessness, 7. Gaza conflict, 8, and then 2% said they're not sure, 1% selected something else. So that, again, is regardless of political party, when they take the totality of the answers, when someone's asked, what's your top issue when you go to vote, that's the order. So now let's look at the discrepancy between political party. And this is, again, where I look at how do you get through to when we're trying to change the trajectory of the state, like little steps. That's why one of the reasons I support Dave Reichert. He's not going to be the antithesis of the current leadership in Washington. He has a track record of being bipartisan, of being independent-minded. He's not like the furthest right-wing candidate. And, I think incremental change is the key to long-term change. But when I look at the huge discrepancy in top issues, I just have a hard time figuring out how do you convince this particular group of Democrats in Washington state to vote different. So let's look Republicans compared to Democrats. So Republicans, their top issue is cost of living, which is the top issue of voters nationally, the economy, right? Mm-hmm. The top issue for Democratic voters in Washington is protecting democracy. Now, look, if our Nicole's like, I can't.
I had this argument this weekend with a friend who said abortion was her top.
Well,
and I was like,
we'll get to that.
What? Like, it's not an issue.
It's really not. And, well, I'll get to that. But
with these two candidates,
yeah,
they're on the same page.
Right. Protecting democracy. If democracy was really in peril, like if it genuinely was, that would be my top issue too. You don't think I want to protect democracy? You don't think I want to protect this nation and everything it stands for? Of course I do. You will find few podcast hosts as patriotic as I am. But that being your top issue just shows that they have bought hook, line, and sinker into the lie that democracy is in peril. And it also, I think Democrats tend to be a little more wealthy. And so they don't care about cost of living. Screw you if you're having trouble making ends meet. They're going to act like they're the party of the poor and the working class. But they don't care if you're struggling because they're not. Second issue for Republicans, crime, followed by homelessness. That seems, if you look at the top actual crises in the state of Washington, where things are actually not going well and getting worse, that's cost of living, crime, and homelessness. And that would be my order as well. It would be cost of living, crime, and homelessness. And then you look at Democrats, their second highest issue is cost of living, and then it's guns. And when you look at that from a Democratic perspective, you're, of course, talking about gun control.
Right.
One of the challenges with asking people what their top issue is you're not asking for more information. So, for instance, a Republican, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth issue is guns on the Republican side. But that's probably Second Amendment rights, right? Yes. So you see the kind of discrepancy. But for Democrats, clearly you're talking gun control. We've already articulated all the reasons why in this state gun control policies have been a failure. You know, they have these big splashy headlines banning so-called assault weapons, weapons of war, yet gun crimes, shootings are through the roof because those aren't working. But you see, Democrats have bought hook, line, and sinker that gun control is the answer to dealing with our crime crisis. It's funny how guns is above crime on their list. Like they think that there's like the cause and effect is like totally backward. And then if we go down on the Republican side, abortion, but again, that could be, I don't know, loosening or tightening restrictions. Who knows? Abortion, guns, climate change, Gaza conflict, not sure. And then on the Democratic side, after guns, abortion, climate change, crime, homelessness. Think about this just for a second.
I know
it's insane.
Because that's what they're loudest on is homelessness in Gaza. Like that, who are we hearing from? Those are not Republicans.
Well, but also the Democrats who took this poll, there's almost no daylight between how many think the Gaza conflict is the biggest issue and how many think homelessness is the biggest issue. Those two things are night and day. Night and day. And yet you're like, towards the bottom of the list. Crime, 5%. Climate change, 8%. So that's a struggle for me. And that's a struggle for any Republican candidate running for statewide elected office in Washington. Is how do they pitch themselves to an electorate that thinks gun control is one of the most important issues, climate change and abortion are even above crime and homelessness? How do you appeal to those voters while being genuine? How do you make them understand that you might care about those issues and you have every right to, but they're not issues that are clear and present crises in Washington state. They're not issues that, the job of governor touches, like the conflict in Gaza. You might want to vote, for someone based on that. Maybe that's their presidential as well. They're factoring that in. And so fine, that makes sense with Gaza, but is that impacting your life? Unless you got someone over there, not as much as these other issues. So that's where I struggle with is, choosing to vote based on an issue that will never actually impact your life directly. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about our neighbors and people around us and all of that, but it's a really hard thing for me to wrap my mind around.
I want to know what protecting our democracy means to both of those voters, right? Those groups of voters, because I think to the Democrats, that's like, from Trump. Like, what does that mean to you? From Trump. Well, what do you think he's going to do to take that away, right?
Right.
But I think that to Republicans, when that comes up on their list, it's like
voting.
It's voting and integrity. And so I think that those are two very different answers.
100%. Yeah. Protecting democracy, 6% on the Republican side. I tend to not think that's maybe some, but I tend not to think that's orange man bad, and more like you said, like voting and tightening our voting laws and all that stuff. So it's just interesting for me to look at that. I mean, there'd be some slight changes, I think, in my order from the Republican side, but the top issues, absolutely 100% right on track. It's complicated.
The conversation I had with my friend who said she won't vote for a Republican because they want to take away, or because they don't have a right to do anything with my body. And I'm like, that's not a thing in this state. It's not a thing. And so I was thinking about that this weekend, and I was going to say, we need to tell Dave one of your first ads should be, just to be clear, I'm doing nothing.
He did
to take away.
That was his first
voters.
ad.
Was it?
Have you not seen it yet?
Maybe I did.
Where he basically said Bob Ferguson's lying about this. Voters and I'm not going to do anything to change it.
Right.
That was one of his first ads. It was like a 15-second ad.
Yeah. Well, it needs to get out there more than.
It needs to be better. 100%. It needs to be better placement. Some of the ads I've seen on weird stations at weird times. It needs to be better placement. That costs money, right? Bob Ferguson has a huge war chest. He can afford to put ads in prime time. I don't know if the Reichert campaign can, but I have seen those out there. So it's just wild. You really have to almost, I don't want to use the word reprogram, but you have to try to make a convincing argument why some of these other issues, they are not the most urgent things as a state we need to be dealing with. So
I got so frustrated. I was like, how many abortions are you planning to have? That's the most important thing to your world right now, because I know that's not a thing.
Right.
And then this person, I don't think that's like something she does regularly or anything. And so I don't get it. I don't understand why people are so manipulated by the media and ads and
Yeah.
liars.
And look,
It's a lie.
I want the government to stay out of my business as well. It's the reason
Absolutely.
I took a very consistent position on the vaccine mandate. It's like, no, keep your jab out of my body unless I choose to have it, right? And the same thing with, the abortion debate. So I don't see a lot of, I know that even Republicans disagree with my assessment on that because you're talking about an unborn baby and what is their say and all of that, but I just don't want the government to have a role in it. And so I have a hard time taking people seriously when they're like, yeah, get the jab or lose your job. But then they're like, my body, my choice.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. No. So, and vice versa for Republicans,
It was
frankly.
a very frustrating conversation that I had this weekend. It's like,
See, at that point, you just got to check out. You just got to be like,
I know.
I'm not going to,
I gotta go.
this isn't going to go anywhere. So